Nationalism. Nationalism is a very, very important theme throughout the Romantic period. Nationalism is the use in art music that is instantly recognizable or instantly identifiable as being from a composer's country or region. Now, the nice thing about nationalism is that it dovetails very nicely to program music, which we have just discussed. But nationalism, national music can be found in any genre of music, from opera to symphony to concerto to piano sonata. So you can find it anywhere. Where a composer might take an old tune, an old folk tune, or an old folk dance, or even a rhythm, and use it anew. And this happens all the time in music today. People are always borrowing in contemporary music themes from the past, melodies from the past, rhythms from the past. So I want to discuss two different composers who exhibit nationalism during the Romantic period. The first one is Frédéric Chopin, who is the poet of the piano. Chopin was born in 1810 and he passes away in 1849. So like Mozart, he lives a very short life. He was born in Zelazowa Wola, Poland, and he's also considered to be the national composer of Poland. He graduated from the Warsaw Conservatory of Music at an advanced age, and then he started to tour Europe, giving recitals. For a couple of years, he tours all of Europe, and then in 1831, at the age of 21, he arrives in Paris, and he falls instantly in love with the Parisian society. And so he takes up residence there. Chopin was not only sought after as a great composer, as a great recitalist, but he was also known as a great piano teacher. And what a wonderful piano teacher Chopin must have been. I studied piano starting in the third grade, and if you only had to play with your right hand, then that would have been amazing. But you have to use both, and the dexterity that I had with my left hand just was not up to speed. But Chopin would have been able to identify that and try to help me out by composing a piece himself in order for me to work through these problems. So a lot of Chopin's piano compositions are called character pieces. They're very, very short music. If you have ever studied piano, if you've had any family members that have, if you've attended these piano recitals, a lot of the music on those piano recitals is music by Frédéric Chopin. One of the national dances of Poland is the mazurka, and Chopin composed many mazurkas throughout his lifetime. And then, once he arrives in Paris, he starts to write more polonaises. So he kind of exhibits a dual nationalistic approach to music. One composer who I'm going to talk about later, Robert Schumann, heralded Frédéric Chopin as the composer of the time because he was focusing in on one style of music, solo piano music, and he was doing it so well and having a great career. Schumann felt that composers should not try to mimic the huge catalogs of Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, but should focus their attention and do one thing and do it very, very well. And Chopin was the epitome of that particular style of composer. One of the collections that Chopin achieved is called the 24 Preludes. If you recall, a composer named Johann Sebastian Bach in the Baroque period composed a composition called the Well-Tempered Clavier. The Well-Tempered Clavier was in response to equal temperament, the tuning system of the day, and the tuning system allowed us to use 12 major keys and their 12 corresponding minor keys, or 24 keys in all, scales in all. And so Chopin loved the Well-Tempered Clavier, and so he wanted to kind of pay homage to Bach. And so he wrote a similar composition called the 24 Preludes. And I have several of these on your listening list. I would like for you to listen, especially to Prelude number 7 in A major. See if you recognize this tune. They're so short, they're used a lot in commercials. Chopin and another composer, Felix Mendelssohn, started to discuss the Well-Tempered Clavier and the music of Bach. And they wondered what else Bach had composed. And so they took it upon themselves to resurrect the music of Johann Sebastian Bach in the 1830s. And this is where Bach finally finds his fame, 80 years after his passing, and then his music never leaves the repertoire. So we owe a lot of debt to Chopin and to Mendelssohn for their efforts. Well, let me tell you about Chopin's relationship. Chopin was involved with a lady who we know of as George Sand. Her God-given name is Aurora Dupont-Dudevant, but she was a novelist, a playwright, a poet, and she knew that if her writings were going to be taken seriously, then she needed to have a male pen name. So she took the name of George Sand, and she and Chopin developed a relationship. And this relationship was between 1838 and 1846. During the time that they were together, Chopin created some of the most joyous music he ever had. When they were apart, his music became very disturbing and very melancholy. So she was a big influence on the music of Chopin. But ultimately, she left him for a poet, and Chopin's life kind of took a tailspin from there. And he returned to his Paris apartment and passed away from tuberculosis in 1849. One of the questions that was on your list of questions for the Mozart biography video was, why is Mozart's First Symphony so Mozartian? Well, the guy in the Mozart biography talks about how he sings out the melody for Mozart's First Symphony, and everybody can instantly identify it as being Mozart's. They might not know it's the First Symphony. Same kind of idea for Chopin's music. Chopin has a certain knack. Once you hear enough of his music, you can pinpoint and know that you're hearing a work by Chopin later on. So please listen to the different Chopin examples that are on your listening list, and know that Chopin is one of the most important composers from now the Romantic period. Another composer that exhibits a great deal of nationalism is a Russian composer, and his name is Peter Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky was born in 1840, and he passes away in 1893. Not all of his music was nationalistic, but many of his compositions were. For instance, the Second Symphony that he composed is called The Little Russian, which uses several different folk songs from Russia's past. Tchaikovsky learned music from his governess, and when he was, you have to remember, Tsarist rule Russia, you're basically predestined into a particular career. His parents were both members of the government, and so Tchaikovsky originally studied law, but because he was excelling in the field of music, strings were pulled for Tchaikovsky, and he was able to re-enroll in the St. Petersburg University, now in the conservatory, and he worked on a degree in composition. During this time, the St. Petersburg Conservatory was the only conservatory of music in Russia. But near the end of Tchaikovsky's education, a new one was being put together in Moscow. And so the faculty members at St. Petersburg recommended Tchaikovsky as one of the new faculty members for the Moscow Conservatory. Kind of similar to Beethoven, where Beethoven had 3 different stylistic periods. Tchaikovsky basically has 2 stylistic periods, and the first one is the Moscow period. The Moscow period is exemplified by Tchaikovsky's first 3 symphonies and his ballet success. Toward the end of his stay in Moscow, Tchaikovsky marries a young lady, and the marriage does not go very well. Tchaikovsky was homosexual, and he was trying to allow the people in the Russian society to think of him as a straight man. Well, people were discovering that he was having an affair with a man in the Moscow Conservatory, and so he tried to attempt suicide, and people found him and collected him and took him off to a nearby hospital. So he was able to heal and get better, and then his family took him back to St. Petersburg. Now, with scandal surrounding Tchaikovsky's name, Tchaikovsky didn't know how he was going to be able to continue in the field of music. And so his second period is called the von Meck period. A very rich, wealthy widow named Natasha von Meck loved classical music, but in particular, she loved the music and was obsessed by the music of Tchaikovsky. So she knew about this scandal as well. So she started to send letters to Tchaikovsky saying, please go on composing. I will subsidize your career. I'll set you up in an apartment. Just keep composing. And so Tchaikovsky agreed to her terms. And one of the terms were if he ever saw her in public, that he would go the other way because she did not want anybody to know that they were friends. So Tchaikovsky has more success as a composer with nationalistic operas like Eugene Onegin and Boris Godunov and the Queen of Spades. His final 3 symphonies come from this period. The 4th symphony is a wonderful piece of music with a theme of destiny that's heard in the trombones. And the final symphony, the Pathétique Symphony, which comes at the very end of his life, is a beautiful work for orchestra. But the book kind of promotes Tchaikovsky as the great ballet composer from the Romantic period. And he continues his ballet success with now the Nutcracker. The Nutcracker, of course, is something that's inescapable in the malls and at the time of Christmas music when it's everybody's decking the halls now, I guess, in October, and we hear that music over and over and over again. But the Nutcracker, based off of a story by E.T.A. Hoffman, tells the story of this young girl whose godfather comes to a party, and then her Nutcracker gift comes alive and does battle with the Mouse King, and then the Nutcracker is morphed into a handsome prince and whisks her off to the land of sweets. In the land of sweets, we have a lot of different dances that are representative of different countries. The Trepak, which is the Russian dance, which is on your listening list, is again showcasing Tchaikovsky's nationalism. So please listen to it. Tchaikovsky, though, was not pleased with the Nutcracker, and he asked von Meck to help him get another debut for it. But it was too late. Von Meck had already worked on having a debut for the Nutcracker, and even though it was related to the Christmas season, it was first performed in the summertime. And so it was not the big hit in the beginning that we think of it today. Tchaikovsky wanted to rework it and especially redo the Kingdom of Sweets section, but that was not to be. So in the late 1920s and early 1930s, the Nutcracker then is premiered during the Christmas season at the Royal Ballet in London. And then the next season it comes across the pond, as they say, and is debuted in New York. And the rest is history. The Nutcracker becomes a very, very important piece of music. So we have Chopin and Tchaikovsky using nationalism within their music to bring comfort to their people and bring their nation's music to light. When next we meet, we're going to talk about German art song and several different German composers.